Good morning and welcome to our NorCal PTAC webinar, Certifications for Veteran-Owned Businesses. This is the first in a week-long series for Veteran Small Business Week that we're putting on in partnership with NorCal VOSB, which they are also doing a ton of fantastic webinars this week. Today, I'm joined by Joseph Moore, our fantastic procurement specialist, and Kelly Behamanthus, the director of our NorCal VBOC. And I am Amanda Anderson. I'm the program coordinator with NorCal PTAC. And before I pass it off to Kelly to let her speak on her fantastic program and absolutely no cost resources for you as veterans, I'm going to go ahead and let you know a little bit about PTAC and what we do. The Northern California Procurement Technical Assistance Center is one of 96 nationwide centers, and we help businesses just like yours with anything and everything related to government contracting. That can be helping you register or renew in sam.gov to helping you get certifications like the ones Joe is going to be mentioning in this webinar, as well as women-owned, minority-owned, basically any certification related to government procurement. And we do this through 3 pillars. Our one-on-one counseling, where we set you up to meet with a procurement specialist, one-on-one to help you with your company's specific needs, as well as custom bid matching, where our procurement specialists help you define criteria that you're looking for in a solicitation, in a contract that you would like to perform on. And our custom bid matching service is able to find those bids, those solicitations, and send them directly to your inbox based on that criteria. And our third pillar, one of the most well-known and most used resources, is all of our webinars and trainings. We have a vast website with a ton of different free, absolutely free resources for you as a contracting company, as well as taking advantage of these webinars that we put on. We put on a lot of webinars, and you can find all of those at our calendar, which is also on our website. We often update that regularly. So if you are interested in government contracting and PTAC services and are within our service area of Northern California, please sign up with us at norcalptac.org. Now, if you aren't in our service area of Northern California, that's okay. Again, we are one of 96 nationwide centers. So there's bound to be a local center near you. And you can find that at aptac-us.org. And again, all of these links will be included in the slides and will be emailed out to you. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kelly to tell you a little bit more about VBOC.
Good morning. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Joe, for inviting the VBOC and myself to participate. And more importantly, thank all of you veterans that are out there joining us today, maybe transition service members, spouse, military connected family members, etc. This really is your week. And as Amanda pointed out, we are here to celebrate and to honor all of you with some information about some resources, maybe even some tips, that sort of thing that you might not be familiar with, or you may be, to help you on your entrepreneurial journey. So my name is Kelly Behamanthus, and I'm the director of the Veterans Business Outreach Center here in Northern California. And you're all used to acronyms that we like to use also in the government, which go by the VBOC. So a little information about the VBOC. Our Veterans Business Outreach Center, as you can see on the slide here, we serve men and women who are active duty service members, Guard, Reserve, veterans, and their family members. As I mentioned, mil spouses and military connected family members and work with our organization too. And we really do help with all of those steps to start or grow your business. And I'll give you a little more details about that as we move on. We collaborate because we have a very large service area and so many amazing veteran-owned businesses and transition service members to serve, if you will, we partner very closely with the SBA, which stands for Small Business Administration, Small Business Development Centers, SCORE, the PTAC, which you're going to hear so much more about this week as well, and then the Women's Business Center. And we do provide that business development service that I had referred to, training and consulting at no charge. I don't like the word free. I don't know if you all like the word free or believe that there's anything free, but I don't. I believe that this is a service that has a value, and you have earned this service. And the honor, if you would, to also meet with one of our consultants so we can help you on your entrepreneurial journey. We have 22 VBOCs across the United States, and we are funded in part by the U.S. Small Business Administration, the SBA, and we're also hosted by Cal Poly Humboldt State. So a little more information about what is the VBOC, what do we do? I can share with you that our primary mission really is Boots to Business. And Boots to Business is conducted, it's a 2-day event that we conduct on military bases. There are 5 of them throughout Northern California. And actually in California, there are actually 15 bases that we serve where we present Boots to Business. And it's 8 modules, as you can see here on the slide. The first module is just a basic introduction to entrepreneurship. Also, we explore with our transitioning service members, do you have an idea for a business? And if so, how do you take that idea and bring it into a reality? Well, we can help you through that process through assisting you with market research. So you can research either your industry, who's your client, maybe your target audience, et cetera. And then we go into other portions of the modules about pricing. What are the economics of your particular idea? How do you price things appropriately so that not only do you break even, but you can actually make money on your venture? And then we go into more details in regards to different types of legal entities that there's not one that's better than any others. It's just basically what's the best legal entity for you, and we can help you through that process as well. And then also financing. How do you find money for your business, to launch business? And I can give you a little tip here. If you can start a company small without borrowing money, we encourage you to do that. But there are some different types of ventures that are going to require that you're going to need capital, and we're going to show you how to get that. And then everything goes into a business plan. How do you plan for the future and, for all the different attributes of your business? And then we talk about more resources such as PTAC. So Boots to Business is a 2-day event, and the Reboot we also offer throughout the community is a 1-day event. Next slide, Joe. Thank you so much. And these are the military bases that we serve here in Northern California. So we basically serve, as I mentioned, a large geographical area, all the way from the Oregon border down to Kern County. And we serve Naval Air Station Lemoore, Monterey, China Lake, Beale, and Travis Air Force bases. We actually go onto bases and serve those transition service members, kind of help give them ideas about opportunities that are available for them after they transition out of the service. Next slide. So what do we provide? Not only just for transitioning service members, but for veterans, as I mentioned, male spouses, et cetera. We provide one-on-one consulting and mentorship, again, for no cost to you. We are sponsored by the SBA, and different types of trainings, one-on-one business plans. We offer workshops. We have a restaurant program that's really fabulous here in Northern California. Many of our veterans are, when they're transitioning, might be going back, starting a restaurant. We hear a lot about, I might be joining my family restaurant when I transition back, or perhaps, some other ventures in the hospitality industry. Veteran farming and ranching is also a very desirable business venture for our veterans. And then we have marketing essentials for veteran-owned businesses, franchising options. Believe it or not, and I bet you do believe it, is that franchising and franchisees are looking for veterans to purchase their franchises. So they offer many incentives, et cetera. And then, of course, in collaboration with our PTAC, government contracting and veteran certifications. We also will help you navigate through all the other resources that are available to you. A lot of times our service members, our veterans, haven't even heard about these services. And then after they hear all about the resources that are available, they say, oh, how do I navigate through all of these? And we can assist you with that. So for more information on the VBOC, VBOC, Veterans Business Outreach Center, please check out our website. It's at norcalvboc.org for updates. And I'll be here for a few more minutes and support in the chat box as well. But I want to thank you again for your service, and thank you again for your time today. And be sure to reach out to us as well if we can assist you going further with your business venture. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Have a great National Veterans Business Week.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelly, especially during this busy week. Well, now that you know about your no-cost resources, let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes, the certifications for veteran-owned businesses with Joe Moore.
Good morning, my fellow veterans. From one veteran to another, I thank you for being here. I hope this webinar today is going to be informative for you on the certification process. And I want to welcome you to this webinar, which is one phase of government contracting. And I forgot to mention it. I thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Amanda, for your upfront support to get this program going. Thank you. As you can see here, my resume is a little extensive, so you just read it over. There's a couple of nuggets I want to put in here for the C service types. I was a CPO before I was commissioned as a Mustang officer. So just a couple acronyms that we used in the Navy. I know that each of you have some nuggets in your background in the military, and I look forward to having the opportunity to get to know you and learn some of your specific nuggets regarding your military service. The approach I'm going to take on this presentation is not to read the slides to you, but to provide amplifying information that I think would be beneficial for you. Questions will be taken at the end of the presentation, and as Amanda said, the slides and the recording will be available. What I want to say about contracting. I've been in contracting for many years, and I find this entire process that has a combination of fixed procedures and processes, and it can be and with some flexibility along the way to make things adjust. It can be very overwhelming and taxing at times, but it also can be very rewarding and a great sense of pride in the end results of once you get a contract and start performing. Next slide, please. Okay. These programs, both the state of California and the federal, are for you, the veteran who has served this country, and to give you back some advantage in obtaining contracts with the state of California or the federal government. Next slide, please. Let me give you a little bit of oversight as to how I see this program fitting into the overall contracting process. First of all, business formation and registration is part of the process to get a business into the arena to go after and obtain federal and state contracts. I think it's very beneficial for companies to learn as much as they can about the contracting process as they're starting up. Ask questions, ask for help, use the resources that are available. Applying what you have learned by means of taking a solicitation for something that you may not be submitting a formal proposal on, but writing up a proposal and having your peers review that proposal as if it was a real red team involvement. And then learn how to prepare solicitations to responses to active solicitations, and then what to do with it after it's submitted. If you don't win, request a debrief. If you win, then perform that contract to the best of your ability, following the terms and conditions of the contract and working closely with your contracting officer. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to now talk about the state of California, disabled veteran business enterprises. Next slide. Okay, these are right out of the regulations here. You must be a disabled veteran. from the U.S. military, naval, or all air services. Veteran must have at least a 10% more disability rating. The veteran must be domiciled in the state of California. And to meet these requirements, must be to be certified as a DVBE, at least 51% of ownership by one or more veterans. It is possible to have a 50-50 ownership relationship with 2 service disabled veterans in that organization. Having a 50-50 business relationship between a service disabled veteran and a non-veteran does not work. The DVBEs must be limited liability or wholly owned by one or more disabled veterans. The home office must be located in the United States. Next slide, please. This is a latest notice that was published on Cal eProcure about the process being slowed down a little bit for the state of California review and approval. Just make you aware of that. Next slide, please. Okay, now, what is the certification process for California? First of all, you go out to Cal eProcure and you register as a vendor. And then you move over to this section that talks about Cal eProcure certification processes. There's two certification programs in the state of California: small business and disabled veteran business enterprise. You will be required to enter keywords and UNSPSC codes, United Nations Special Purpose Special Codes, into the application. And you'll be uploading some other documents that may be required based on your business structure. For the veteran side, for both veteran and small business, you will be uploading tax returns, federal tax returns for the last 3 years, or the number of years the business has been in business, if less than 3 years. Next slide, please. You're also going to provide IRS verification of your taxpayer ID number. And you'll be doing quarterly contributions and returns reports of wages paid and reported to the state of California, the DE-9C form. And award of entitlement benefits based off of your benefit notification letter from the VA or your retirement or retained military documents. At the bottom of the section in the Cal eProcure under registrations, you will see there's 2 links: small business document requirements and DVBE required documents. I'm going to talk a little bit about those right now. Next slide. Okay, we've already mentioned the IRS document, your entitlement certificate, certifying your service disabled veteran disability rating of at least 10%, tax returns, and a new item is a resume or resumes if there's multiple veteran owners. Next slide. And resumes must reflect, just to back up for a second, you don't need to pull the slide back. Resumes must reflect that you have experience, qualifications, and knowledge in the area in which you're doing the business. If you're going to be a nuclear scientist, you've got to be able to show you had experience working in the nuclear industry. You can't just say, I went nuclear because I was out partying. Okay, just a minor laugh joke here. Come on. Okay, the next item is these requirements are supplemental requirements listed in the eCal Procure business license or seller's permit. If you're doing equipment rental, you must show that you own 51% of the equipment. And all equipment, and for all equipment that is rented to the states. If your company is formed under a trust agreement, franchise agreement, corporations or partnership or LLPs, the additional specific documents are required. Submit only the documents required. Do not send any additional documents unless they're requested. And remember, the LLC, it must be wholly owned by one or more disabled veterans. Next slide, please. Okay. When you submit your application for small business and disabled veteran business enterprise, it is submitted simultaneously. You will get the small business certification at the time you get your disabled veteran business certification notification. You will not get any you will not get a disadvantaged veteran business enterprise certification from the state unless you apply for it. And if you need to have a requested expedition of your application, that can be completed by providing a copy of the solicitation with the agency name, point of contact, and the bid due date, and they will expedite your application process so you can meet the date of that proposal submission, having the disabled veteran business enterprise certification. Next slide. Okay. Now, the advantages of having this certification for the state of California. State agencies and departments have an annual goal of 3% of all contracting dollars. In some cases, there may be up to a 5% incentive, and that's a rather detailed process. I won't go into it here, but it is possible to get additional incentives if you go through that process. And then small business, disabled veteran business enterprise option, state agencies can contract directly with DVBE firms after obtaining a price quote from at least 2 certified DVBE firms with no public solicitation and with limitations. The reciprocating partners is a list of state agencies that will honor your certification as a disabled veteran business enterprise, and that link is active, and it will show you who the city, county, and special agencies are. These cities or counties or agencies may require some additional information, but that is a good way for companies to walk in and learn government contracts. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to talk about the federal government, service disabled veteran and veteran-owned small business verification process. Okay, now currently, the state of California, it's a certification process. And for the federal government, it's verification. I will tell you something different in a few moments. Okay, recent changes to the verification program. On 1 April of this year, the DUNS number went away and UEIs became mandatory. UEIs are assigned to each SAM registered firm, and the first time you make a change to your SAM registration after the 1st of April 2022, you have to go in and do a validation that you are in fact the company that was listed under this UEI number. And then you can proceed on updating your SAM registration. There is a specific set of documents that are required to complete the UEI verification. Size standards. SBA size standards changed on 6 January 22. There is also the got a mental blank here. The dollar amount or number of employees had been updated, and that's just been published, I think, since July. It's now 5 years of annual receipt calculations. All federal programs are now requiring 5 years of average receipts, both for new and renewal applications, and it's for both business and personal tax returns. Payroll submission documents is still 2 years. Next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, this is the most recent change, if you have not heard about this. The National Defense Authorization Act in 2021 established the fact that the service disabled veteran-owned and veteran-owned small business program would migrate over to the SBA on 1 January 2023. In order to meet this migration date, the Center for Veterans Enterprise stopped receiving new applications Monday a week ago at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So everybody that got their application in prior to that date and time will be processed. So the information that I'm going to be telling you in the remaining part of this presentation is related to the procedures that are currently in effect for those firms who have their application as being accepted. Okay, we anticipate that the program on 1 January is going to use the same guidelines, but it has not been finalized yet or publicized to verification counselors. So after the once the verification changes over on 1 January 2023, it would be a certification process, not a verification process, because the SBA runs certification processing for 8As, HUBZone, woman-owned small business, economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. So it's going to be part of their certification of programs. There's no requirement for current certified or verified veteran firms holding a certification date with an expiration date anytime after January to do anything at this point in time. Okay, now next slide. Now we're still talking about the firms that have their applications submitted prior or on or prior to Monday, 24 October. You've got 3 major categories that have to be met: eligibility, ownership, and control. There is a there was a pre-qualification quiz on VetBiz, but that's no longer there right now because they're no longer taking applications. But these are the 3 categories that a firm has to meet to be able to be verified at this time. Okay, next slide, Amanda. Now, the first one on the eligibility is size standard. You must be small under your primary NAICS code. NAICS code is a North American industry classification codes. They have been around for a long time. And this link right here will take you out and help you find the 2022 NAICS codes for your business. You have to be small, and you have to match that size standard. The size standard is based on 5 years of average revenue or 5 years of average number of employees. And you have to be small in those categories. More information can be found at Code of Federal Regulations, Title 13, Part 125, Subpart B for NAICS codes. Next slide, please. Ownership. Ownership has to be unconditional and direct owners by one or more service-disabled veterans. Unconditional ownership is defined as no restrictions on the ability to acquire or dispose of the shares of the company. Direct ownership is also, ownership cannot be attained through a holding company or a trust. So it has to be direct ownership of the service-disabled veteran, at least 51%. A note here on this one. It might contradict a little bit of what Kelly said, but unconditional ownership by VA verification standards can be affected if a business is a franchise, where the restrictions are put in place by the parent company, such as the ability to have full control of business, where a specific corporate procedure has to be followed. That is in the Code of Federal Regulation for veteran verification related to franchises. Okay, next one, please. Control. The veteran must have day-to-day control of the company, responsible for the management decisions, and be the highest level officer in title and compensation for that firm. Okay, next one, please. Okay, the current process being utilized for those individuals who got their applications in by the 24th of October, there's an intake review after the initial submission, where a Center for Veteran Enterprise counselor would review the package to ensure that everything is complete and they got the right amount of documentation of everything. Excuse me. Once they make that, complete that review, they then turn that over to the government for the assessment review. The intake review is done by a contractor under contract to Veterans Administration. Normally, the decision is within 60 days of submission. Hence why I think they came out with the 24th of October for a last day of submission, so they can get their backlog cleaned up as much as possible before they start transferring the files over to the SBA. Next slide, please. Okay, anything that you have to submit on a application, there was a list of required documents online. But items that you did not have, for example, if they asked for payroll for the last 5 years and you've had no payroll, you could address that issue by what's called a letter of exception. You would prepare this letter of exception, submit it in lieu of your payroll documents, telling the adjudicators as to why you don't have a payroll. And so this is one way to get the documents submitted. And in the I want to say old process, all owners had to submit and sign a VA form 0877. That was the last document that went in after your application was submitted, before it went to the initial intake review. Now, for those who have submitted applications that are in the pending stage right now, if you receive a final post-review finding notice, you must comply within the due date of that for resubmission, usually 5 business days. If you cannot meet the due date for the additional information that the adjudicators are looking for, the best thing to do is request a voluntary withdrawal and you resubmit the application in a future date. If you do not meet the deadline or you do not request a voluntary withdrawal, your process would then, your application would then be denied, and you would have to wait 6 months before you could resubmit the application. There is an appeal process for denied applications. It has to be submitted within 10 days of receipt of denial letter. Okay. Federal government has a mandatory amount of 3% of all government dollars, procurement dollars can be awarded to service-disabled veteran-owned firms. Okay. There's been a push for the last number of years in the Congress to try to get that a number raised to 5%, but so far they haven't been successful. Veterans Administration will give preference in most cases to service-disabled and veteran-owned small businesses and contract awards. There are no set-aside amounts for veteran-owned small business. Other federal agencies may recognize the verification of service-disabled veterans and may create a set-aside in a specific solicitation. Next slide, please, Amanda. Once your verification is approved, if you're in that group of people who submitted applications by 24 October, your verification, once it's approved, is valid for 3 years. The business firm will then receive a notice of how to download an electronic logo for either veteran-owned small business or service-disabled veteran-owned small business to be applied to your marketing material, your business card, your letterhead, your capability statement. A good way to advertise to other federal agencies that you have gone through the formal validation process. I want to thank you for your attention today. And I know it's been a lot of information given to you in a short time, but just remember, it's your program and there's assistants out here to help you in this area through this PTAP or other PTAP organizations. I'm now going to turn it over to Amanda so she can start looking at the questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joe. And before we go into questions, we do have some very good questions. I wanted to make you aware of the other sessions of this series this week. We have a fantastic panel of veteran women business owners on Wednesday morning that I'm personally very excited for. And then we will be joined by the DGS, Office of Small Disadvantaged Business, for I'm DVBE certified, now what? And they will be giving a presentation on how, from the state agencies, how they think you can best use your certifications. Good. And then on Friday, we'll be joined by a representative from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs to further help you maximize your opportunities with these certifications. And you can sign up for all of those events from our calendar, and it will be linked in the slide. And I will also drop a link in the chat. And with that, let's go ahead and answer some of these questions. Joe, we had William Harris wondering if California is considering a non-disabled veteran certification.
I've not heard anything about that being an option. That'd be a good question for the Wednesday meeting.
Definitely. I think DGS would definitely have more of a finger to the pulse of what they're considering. But there is a non-disabled certification on the federal level, correct?
That's the veteran-owned small business. Yes. The veteran Perfect. That does not have a disability rating.
Fantastic. And then Terry Thomas was wondering if there's certain types of business that would not qualify for these certifications. You did mention that corporations can get a little iffy.
No, it's franchises.
Franchises.
Franchising for the federal level can have some issues of being able to show that they have full ownership and control based on the documents in the franchise agreement. And that's reviewed by the adjudicators.
Yeah. And can you think of any other kind of situations like that where it might be hard to keep the certification?
No, I can't right off the top of my head. Again, if there's a change of ownership after a firm has been verified with the Center for Veterinary Enterprise, if there's a change of ownership and that ownership doesn't include 51% of ownership of veteran, that verification approval will be removed.
Perfect. And just for general clarification, these certifications can be for any industry, correct?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. And then we had Laura, who was wondering if she could be certified as a disabled vet in the retail service business, or if you would recommend that certification for a retail service business.
Well, you can, when the program does open back up, right now it's closed, but when the program opens up after 1 January, you can apply based on that area of work you're in. And it's going to be based on the documentation you provide in your application package, if the adjudicators will approve you.
Fantastic. And you said the apply date, they're reopening the program in January?
The program is supposed to be reopened under SBA auspices on 1 January. We don't know yet. They have not advised any of the verification counselors, which I am one of any of what's going to happen after 1 January. So it's kind of a wait and see right now.
Fantastic. So Latoya, when you asked when you could start applying again, keep an eye out for January, as long as everything goes well. And then we have one more question. Is there a site that they can review if they were previously certified to kind of check in on their certification?
They can go to vetbiz.gov and verify that they're in the database as certified firms, or to check on other firms that are verified.
Perfect. So that is all the questions that we have here.
Well, you guys are easy. You guys were easy today.
Any other last minute questions, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A. I do want to remind you folks that this recording and these slides with all active links will be sent to you via email. That will be done later on today. So you'll have them by the end of today if you want to maybe sit down and review them. And then you will also be redirected when you leave this webinar to a link of our survey. We highly value your input on these webinars because we do these webinars for you, to benefit you. So your feedback is always invaluable to us on how we can improve these to better get the information across, and even topics you may want to see from us. Let us know in the survey. It looks like we have one more question from Latoya to close us out. Can you have more than one veteran certified business at a time?
Well, again, that's kind of not a trick question, but you have to remember, you have to have day-to-day control of the operation, and you have to have 51% of ownership. I can see the ownership being met. I can see the control being questioned, because how can you have enough control to have two separate firms and you're doing two different lines of business? But I could see the ownership portion being met, but the control could be an issue.
Perfect. That's great to know. Thank you so much for all of your questions. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We're so happy you could make it. And I hope you have a great Monday and a great Halloween if you celebrate it, and an even better week.
Thank you all for attending, and Let us hear from you.
Bye, guys.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone.